It's been 20 years since I married Richard, and then out of the blue, this long lost system pops up and tells me my mission is complete and I can, go home. So I did what any rational person would do. I let Richard and our son, Peter, hand over all our remaining grain coupons. We're talking a serious stash here. To the main character of this whole story, this woman named Clara, and then Peter, bless his heart, gives his college spot to Clara's daughter. My neighbor, Brenda, she's all confused, asking me why I'm suddenly so chill about everything. I just smiled and said, because I'm going home. But little did they know, they were about to freak out when they found out what that really meant. Beep, dear host. Hello. Your vicious female antagonist series of tasks has been completed. The portal to return to the real world will open in 5 days. Please prepare yourself. Hearing that robotic voice I hadn't heard in ages, I was kind of in a daze. I'd been stuck in this world, living in this backwater village for 20 years. Back in college, my senior year, I was job hunting when, bam, I transmigrated and got hooked up with this system. I figured, like in all those romance novels, I was here to save the male lead or win over the super devoted second male lead. Nope. The system told me my job was to basically be the roadblock to make sure the main couple didn't get together too easily. And then, radio silence. The system went completely offline. If it hadn't suddenly pinged me, I'd have totally forgotten I even had a mission. Hey, Sarah, you okay? You're spacing out. You're about to drown those veggies, Brenda, my neighbor, yelled, grabbing the watering can out of my hand. That snapped me out of it. I felt kind of bad, so I apologized to Brenda and then squatted down to dig a little ditch to drain off the extra water. Then I grabbed the watering can back and kept watering. Sarah, you're grinning like a fool. Is it because Peter's going to study in the city? That's awesome. If my kid got in, I'd be smiling in my sleep. But my kid's not as book smart as Peter. Guess it's because you guys are educated. The kid you have can read and write. Brenda laughed, waving her hand, teasing me. Hearing that, the smile kind of faded from my face. I paused for a second, then went back to what I was doing. It's not that. As for college, Peter told me yesterday he's not going. Not going? Brenda's eyes went wide. Sarah, that's crazy talk. The university Peter got into? People would kill to get in there. How can he just decide not to go? Is there some problem at home? You have to talk some sense into him. This isn't a joke. If your family has any troubles, let us know. We'll definitely help if we can. Listening to Brenda, I felt this wave of relief. But then, thinking about why my son wasn't going to school, I just sighed. Seeing I wasn't saying anything, Brenda frowned and finished pouring the last bit of water. It must be because of the Miller family's daughter. Honestly, that mother and daughter, they're both bad news. The mom's a leech on your husband, and the daughter's a leech on your son. Seriously shameless. Brenda stood beside me, working and cursing them out at the same time. Before, I probably would have joined in complaining about my own family drama, but just now, the system told me I originally only needed to stay here for 4 years, but because of a system glitch, well, I'd been here way longer. But as compensation, once I went back, not only would I get a 10 million reward, but the system would also grant me one wish. I was almost knocked unconscious by this news. I was so excited to finally ditch this life. I didn't have time to care about the Lynn family's two foolish father and son. So, I just kind of tuned out Brenda's complaining. After saying a quick goodbye, I went to the team leader and exchanged all my saved up work points for grain coupons and cloth coupons. Because back then you still needed coupons to buy stuff. Then, I rushed to catch the last train into the city, traded the cloth for some really nice fabric, and had the store make me a new outfit. After that, I went to this restaurant I'd been dying to try for years and pigged out before leisurely carrying a few veggies and a little bit of meat back home. I mean, I was going home. If I didn't use these work points I'd saved up, it'd be a waste. And they'd just end up going to the Miller mother-daughter duo for nothing. When I first got here, Richard was still this, super clear-headed, promising university student. So after I married him, everyone said I was so lucky. They just couldn't see me getting up at dawn to set up a breakfast stall and earn money, nor could they see me being constantly nagged by his mother day and night because I couldn't provide support for Richard. But I didn't mind. After all, Richard was indeed very good to me. He'd pick me up and we'd go home together when he had no classes. He'd stand in front of me when Richard's mother criticized me and massage my back when I woke up exhausted in the middle of the night. I really wanted to change Richard's ultimate lonely and disgraced fate, but later I realized I was wrong. No matter how hard I tried, the ending that was already set wouldn't change because of me, an outsider. In the end, Richard fell for the main female character, Clara. He not only gave up his high-paying job, but even volunteered to move to the countryside. He stayed in the village for 18 years. All those years turned me from a vibrant young girl into a real housewife, juggling farm work and housework. I looked at my rough hands and, let's be honest, my bigger figure with a bit of self-mockery, relieved that these awful days were finally over. When I passed by one straw hut after another and reached the only cramped little house, I saw my son putting his university acceptance letter and the money I'd saved into Clara's daughter's hands. Lily, you're a girl. You need this acceptance letter and the money more than I do. When you go to the city, things will definitely be different from the village. This money is from your father and me. Please take it. My husband, standing beside us, was lovingly persuading Clara and her daughter. After a couple of rounds of fake refusal, Clara finally accepted, all grateful and stuff. I just laughed at the whole scene. Brenda was kinda right. The Miller mother and daughter were seriously heartless, treating their own futures like some kind of game. Even though I didn't want to deal with them anymore, Peter was still my son. Driven by, I guess, maternal love. I frowned and snatched the acceptance letter from him. Peter, have you really made up your mind? Forget how hard it was for you to get into university. If the fact that you transferred your spot gets discovered, then you— Mom? Peter cut me off, all impatient. This is my choice. Dad agreed too. Why are you interfering? You've been in the village for so long. Don't you know how hard it is for girls to get into university? And you taught me to be helpful, but you're so stingy yourself. I looked at him, totally disappointed. I didn't get why my efforts to, teach my son had turned out like this. She needs it. She can take the exam herself. All these years, you and your father have given them grain and meat coupons. Even the money I saved for your education goes to them. Have you ever thought about how our family is going to survive? After saying that, I couldn't help but give Clara and her daughter a dirty look. Thanks to Richard and his dad's occasional generosity, they were doing pretty well. They didn't have to do farm work, and Richard even gave his job as a points clerk to Clara, making her the best off among our group of sent-down youth. After hearing my words, tears welled up in Clara's eyes. She handed the money back to me. Mrs. Reed, it's my fault. Richard told me that what he gave me was all that was left from your side, things you didn't need. I didn't think much about it. Please don't fight because of me. For this university, my daughter Lily will take the exam herself. I will earn the money for her education on my own. Richard, thank you for all your help over the years, but to prevent Mrs. Reed from misunderstanding, we should reduce our interactions. As Clara tried to leave, Richard, looking anxious, grabbed her hand. Clara, what are you talking about? This household isn't her place to meddle in. Peter and I, two men, don't need that much money. You two girls should have some savings for yourselves. And what do you mean by reducing interactions? I'm married now. What could she possibly misunderstand? All right, just take the money and things. In the end, I could only helplessly watch Clara and her daughter take the money and acceptance letter and leave. After a disappointed glance at the father and son, I casually threw the basket I had been carrying onto the table and turned to leave. This place was too suffocating. I needed to get out. But before I could take 2 steps, Richard called out to me. Sarah, were you doing this on purpose? I stopped. Not because of Richard's stern words, but because of that long, familiar name. It had been so long since anyone called me by that name. Ever since being sent to the countryside, people initially called me Miss, then Mrs. Reed, but no one ever used my actual name. Why did you have to say that just now? Clara has been spoiled since she was young, and being sent down has already been too much for her. Are you going to stab her in the heart? Our family isn't short on money. Why do you have to poke holes in this facade? Is making others embarrassed your goal? Why are you so vindictive? That's right, Mom. Didn't you see how Lily was on the verge of tears after what you just said? Why is your heart so hard? Besides, Lily is definitely going to marry into our family in the future. The university spots are the same for everyone, aren't they? Can't you stop being unreasonable? Hearing this, I really wanted to laugh. They didn't earn the money or the work points themselves, so of course, they thought I was being heartless. Since Richard was sent to the countryside, his health has never been good, so I was forced to do the work of two people alone, just to earn extra work points to exchange for grain coupons to help his health. At first, Richard was still considerate of me. He would even cry and apologize to me at night when he saw my hands becoming rough from farm work. Every time this happened, I would feel grateful that I had married the right person. Later, after he learned that Clara wasn't eating or sleeping well, he stopped caring about me. Not only did he give the few grain coupons our family had to Clara, causing me to faint from low blood sugar several times due to not eating enough. Later, he even stayed all night outside her door despite his own weak health, completely disregarding my feelings while I was pregnant. Then, after his health improved significantly, he started working desperately on farm tasks to earn work points to exchange for cloth coupons. I thought he wanted to exchange them for our son's use, but later I discovered it was because Clara envied others' nice clothes. There have been countless such incidents over these 18 years. At first, I would get angry with him and even consider divorce. But seeing our little son, I always felt discouraged. I always thought I could endure for the sake of the child, endure and endure. And that endurance led us to now. A sharp pain in my hand snapped my wandering thoughts back. I looked at the hand gripping my arm. Unlike the gentle grip on Clara's hand, Richard's hand clenched mine like an iron clamp. His fingernails were slightly white from the pressure, just like his pale, sickly complexion, I thought absent-mindedly. Sarah, why are you spacing out? I'm talking to you. I originally thought I would argue with them as usual, yelling and crying about why. But unexpectedly, looking at Richard and his son now, all I felt was annoyance. I forcefully slapped the hand Richard was holding mine with, watching him release it in pain. The suffocating frustration inside me finally dissipated a bit. It won't happen again. Do whatever you want. Saying that without looking at the father and son's questioning faces, I turned and left, letting the setting sun take away the last warmth from my body. One night, staying at Brenda's house, I slept exceptionally well. I wasn't awakened in the middle of the night by Richard's uncontrollable coughing, nor was I disturbed by Peter's studying noises in the morning. I even woke up naturally after a full night's sleep and enjoyed hot meals, something I had never experienced while staying at the Lynn family's home. If life could be so comfortable, who would want to work themselves to death? Countdown to return to reality, 48 hours. Maybe my absence from home these past 2 days made Richard and his son feel a sense of urgency, so they arrived at Brenda's house early in the morning to apologize to me. There's no lasting grudges in a family. As long as we talk things out, life must go on. Mrs. Reed, trust me, your good days are still ahead. Brenda's mother-in-law smiled reassuringly, while Brenda herself held my hand with a worried expression. I forced a smile and obediently followed Richard and his son back home. Not out of softness, but because I had already been a burden to Brenda for too long. Staying any longer wouldn't be good for her either. Moreover, with less than 2 days left before my return home, it was time to put an end to things with Richard and his son. Once home, I pretended not to notice Richard's earnest expression, as if he wanted to have a heartfelt conversation with me. I turned around and went into the room to take out the grain and meat coupons I had secretly saved all these years. If it weren't for the sewing and small jobs I did during sleepless nights to exchange for grain coupons, I would have starved to death long ago. Seeing me about to leave without looking back, Richard, looking pale, blocked my path. Sarah, can you stop throwing a tantrum? I know you're angry with me for acting impulsively, but I promised Clara's parents to take care of her. We've been married for so many years. Peter and Lily are getting settled too. How could I still have anything with Clara? Please stop losing your temper. Do you know how much gossip the villagers have been spreading about Clara because of your actions these past few days? And can you learn from Clara and spend more time socializing with those city classmates instead of getting so close to these rural women? What can these country folk do for us? You've been around them for so many years that you've become so country-like. Don't forget, we're still going back to the city eventually. Richard's slightly disdainful words made me laugh involuntarily. I glanced coldly at Peter, who stood aside, nodding in agreement. Peter, do you feel the same way? Peter nodded proudly. Of course, Mom, we're educated people. Not like these face the soil and back to the sky farm workers. I mean, Mom, you should spend more time with Aunt Clara and learn how she takes care of herself. Look at yourself now. Next year, when I get into university, what if my classmates see you? Who knows how they'll laugh at you behind your back? I looked at them with disappointment, not understanding why they had turned out this way. Richard, have you forgotten that it was your own mouth that called these uncouth people, forcing you to walk 5 kilometers to the city clinic to save your life? And you, Peter, it was your so-called farm workers who saved both me and you during my difficult labor. Otherwise, do you think you'd still be alive here to mock them? Peter, I didn't understand before why the son I personally taught would turn out so unreasonable, with his mind filled with romantic notions. Later, I realized that this is probably inherited from your father and it can't be changed. Peter, Richard, I've given you both my all, but I still can't turn things around. I'm tired after all these years. Let it be. Anyway, I was going home. Their lives no longer had anything to do with me, and I picked up the grain coupons from the table and turned to leave the house filled with my memories. Just as I reached the doorway, I locked eyes with Brenda, whose expression was complicated. She struggled for a moment before grabbing my arm and saying, Mrs. Reed, I've thought long and hard, and there are some things I need to say. I know there's a saying, better to tear down a temple than to break up a marriage. But seeing how poorly you've been treated all these years, even I can tell. So even if you distance yourself from me in the future, I need to say this. Mrs. Reed, divorce Richard. If you have nowhere to go, you can continue living at my house. I can talk to my mother-in-law about it. If that doesn't work, I'll take you to stay at my parents' home. You once told me that your mother loves you very much. I can. You once told me that your mother loves you very much. I can't even imagine how heartbroken she would be if she knew what you've endured all these years. Mrs. Reed, you told me before that to love others, you must first love yourself. How did you forget that? Yes, how did I forget? After a moment of daze, I grabbed Brenda's hand and smiled, saying, Brenda, don't worry. I won't anymore. You don't need to worry about me because I'm going home. A noise came from behind. I turned around to see Richard staring at me with a pale face. Indifferently, I withdrew my gaze and placed the grain coupons I had been holding into Brenda's hand. Brenda, these are the coupons I've saved up over the years. Since I'm going home and won't need them anymore, I'm giving them all to you. Didn't you tell me last time that you wanted to make some beautiful clothes but didn't have enough cloth coupons? With these from me, you should be able to do it. Also, don't hesitate to use these meat coupons. Just take care of yourself. Sarah! Richard grabbed my hand desperately, his eyes full of panic. Aren't you an orphan? Where are you going to go? I frowned and shook Richard's hand off, disdainfully patting the dust off my arm. Mind your own business about where I go. Richard tried to say something more, but we heard someone shouting nearby. The Miller family girl has fallen into the water! Peter, who had been standing at the door with a mocking expression, turned ghostly pale upon hearing the news and ran toward the village's only river. Richard's face also became anxious. Sarah, Lily has fallen into the water. If you want to go, go ahead. Do you think I can stop you from rescuing her? Why are you pretending to act like this here? I replied, somewhat bewildered. Richard looked at me with a complicated expression for a long time before leaving with only one sentence. Wait for me to come back and explain. And then ran toward the river. I didn't bother to watch anymore. I had many things to do, and I wasn't going to waste any more time on these people. After explaining everything to Brenda, I ran to the team leader to subtly ask if I could proceed with the divorce unilaterally. Receiving a negative response didn't disappoint me. After all, the system had told me that once I left, my body here would die. It was just that this body would be buried under the name of Richard's wife. Although it made me a bit uncomfortable, by then I would have already left and wouldn't be associated with it. After brainwashing myself like this, I no longer worried about the divorce. Upon returning home, unsurprisingly, the father and son showed no signs of returning. After all, this wasn't the first time such a thing had happened. When I was younger, I would still listen to his words and wait anxiously for an explanation he promised that night. But often, the next day, all I would receive was his, "I forgot. Next time I'll tell you. Don't be so petty." Through days and nights of disappointment, I learned to brainwash myself. I convinced myself that Clara was a lonely person who indeed needed Richard more urgently than I did. I persuaded myself that Clara had already followed the plot's progression and was pregnant with the male lead's child, making it impossible for Clara and Richard to have any illicit affair. I brainwashed myself into believing that Richard still cared about this family. Later, I gave up. Some people are just despicable and can't change. With a light chuckle, I took out the cotton quilt I had prepared for Peter and covered myself, letting out a sigh of reflection. Since giving birth to Peter, I hadn't slept well even once. Every day was spent worrying about this or that. Even the good things at home were reserved for Peter. This cotton quilt took me more than half a year to gather enough cotton and cloth coupons. It took another few months for this quilt to be delivered to me. Originally, I intended to leave this quilt for Peter to take to university, but since he didn't want to go to school, it was better to keep it for myself than let the Miller mother and daughter benefit from it. I stopped thinking about it and gradually fell asleep. Countdown to return to reality, 8 hours. When I woke up in the morning, the house was empty. I didn't mind making breakfast for myself, thinking about what the cloth shop owner had made for me. At that time, I was too excited and didn't know if the cloth shop owner had understood my requirements, so I left. If I had suddenly left while they were modifying the clothes, it might have scared them, which would have been bad. After pondering for a while, I still thought staying here was better than waiting at the ready-made clothes shop. This way, the modifications could be done faster. And I also wanted to wear my new clothes and show them to Brenda. When I returned to the village wearing my new clothes, I successfully caught the envious glances of many people, including Lily, who had just returned from the team leader. Her gaze towards me held not only envy, but also a hint of determination. As I expected, shortly after I arrived home and delivered my things and made some sales, the Lynn father and son came back. "Sarah, you really made new clothes. This must have cost quite a few cloth coupons." At that moment, I was eating my last meal in this world. "Yes, what's wrong?" Richard didn't expect me to reply like that. The words got stuck in his throat. He could only press his lips together, pull my hand, and sit next to me. "Sarah, can you apologize to Clara and Lily? You know, Clara never had to suffer before being sent down. She was spoiled growing up, so whatever others gave her, she just took it without thinking anything was wrong. It was because you said those things in front of her that she realized she had been relying on us to survive all these years, and she couldn't bear it and sought death. Just consider it saving a life. Go apologize to them. If you really can't face it, then maybe you should compensate them with your new clothes. After all, you look so good in them. Their skin is fair and delicate. They'll look even better wearing them. If Clara feels better, maybe she won't seek death. You know how girls love beautiful things?" I almost withdrew my hand the next second, feeling absurd and ridiculous. "Richard, I almost doubt how you got into university in the first place. She was the destiny of a wealthy girl, so am I supposed to suffer? Do you still think she's the 18-year-old Clara from before? Richard, we're almost 40. Being naive at 18 is called innocence, but being naive at 40 with kids already born is called pretense. Do you really think she didn't know our family's situation all these years? She knows, she just can't ask. Because she's afraid you'll reveal the truth, and if you do, she won't be able to live a life of comfort as she does now. Richard, I've worked so hard for this family all these years, I don't believe you can't see it. And you, do you want the clothes? Can't you just say no? Why disgust me here? Honestly, you and Clara actually match quite well. Both are shameless. Richard, after all these years of entanglement, aren't you tired? Let's divorce. I'll set you free and you can be with Clara." I looked at Richard with resignation, feeling the pent-up frustration in my heart dissipate as I said these words. But Richard hadn't spoken yet. Peter first loudly objected. "No, Mom, do you have to do this? Do you really want to make everything a mess just to satisfy yourself? You know that the villagers have been gossiping about Aunt Clara and Lily because of your recent overreactions, and you're still saying these things. You're just trying to throw them into the fire." Besides, my dad and Aunt Clara have pure friendship. Just because you don't have female friends doesn't mean my dad can't have any. You just spent so much time with these rustic village women, vulgar. Peter, I was so angry that I slapped the table hard. How dare you talk to me like that? Peter was startled but still stubbornly refused to apologize. I was completely disappointed. The wish the system gave me was supposed to be used for Peter so that after I left, Peter could continue to live smoothly. But now, I felt like a joke. So I finally used that wish on myself. I wanted to go back to when I first entered school. I wanted to experience my university life. Peter, since you don't like me being your mother and even think I've disgraced you, then let's cut off the mother-son relationship. From now on, you and your father have nothing to do with me. Countdown to return to reality. 3, 2, 1. Finally, I could go home. Listening to the system's mechanical voice, I had never felt like crying so much. Through my teary eyes, I seemed to see Richard rushing over with a panicked expression, trying to grab me. But the next second, my vision went white, and I fell into unconsciousness. When I woke up, I was startled awake by a push and loud noises. Sarah! Sarah! Class is over. Hurry up and go eat. I looked around dazedly at the unfamiliar faces beside me. You finally woke up! Hurry! Hurry! There's only 1 minute left until class ends. I must eat sweet and sour pork ribs at the cafeteria today. 3, 2, 1, go. Before I could respond, the girl grabbed me and dragged me outside. Although I didn't understand what was happening, I followed her outside. After eating and lying on the dormitory bed, reality finally hit me. I had really returned. Dear host, your reward has been issued. Please check your account. Hearing this mechanical voice and seeing the modern developments around me, I was so startled that I threw my phone, something I hadn't touched in a long time, onto my nose, causing pain that made me grit my teeth. No doubt now, I had indeed returned. Just as I was about to curse, I suddenly remembered that the system had told me my reward was 10 million. Immediately, all feelings of anger vanished. I hurriedly opened my phone to check the balance. After confirming my bank account balance 4 or 5 times, I burst into laughter. A failed romance in exchange for living comfortably in the second half of my life. Thinking about it, it didn't seem so bad after all. As I happily fantasized about what to do with this money, the system spoke again. Congratulations, host. You have completed the mission. Would you like to know the outcome of your mission target after you left? The smile on my face faltered. Thinking of the Lin father and son, I still felt a surge of resentment. Are they doing well? If they are, I won't watch it. They're doing quite badly. I don't know if it was my imagination, but I always felt that when the system said this, there was a tone of schadenfreude. After learning that the Lin father and son met a miserable end, I actually became interested in their aftermath, so I asked the system to play the footage of what happened after I left. After I suddenly died in front of them, Richard went crazy. Not only did he reject Peter's suggestion to bury me, but he also clung to me daily without letting go. Even when Clara came to persuade him to bury me, he didn't listen and even drove her away. Later, my corpse began to smell, and Peter couldn't stay at home anymore. He had to pack and move to the Miller family. He originally wanted to live as before, relying on others for everything, but how could the Miller mother and daughter treat him the same as I used to care for him? Now Peter not only had to work 10 hours of farm labor daily to barely make a living, but also had to rush back each day to cook for the two of them, even squeezing in time to sleep, let alone studying for the next year's college entrance exams. Peter soon realized this was not right, so he tentatively tried to get Lily to return the acceptance letter to him. But once the items were in their hands, how could the Miller mother and daughter let go? Later, under their brainwashing, Peter not only gave up the second year's college entrance exams, but also supported the Miller mother and daughter until Lily finished university. Of course, it wasn't that Peter didn't want to continue supporting them, but that Lily had already found a new source of support. When Peter found out about this, Lily was already pregnant in the city and had even brought Clara into the city. All these years of effort had gone to waste and Peter couldn't accept it. That day, he grabbed a knife and rushed to Lily's home, killing both Lily and her husband, and even Clara, who had gotten up in the middle of the night to see what was happening. Later, after shouting, "Mother, I was wrong," to the sky, he committed suicide. After Richard found out about this, he not only didn't react, but also held my ashes, saying that it was Peter's fault. Later, Richard was cheated out of his money by a fake monk who claimed to be able to revive relatives and died desolate in the woods. After watching it, I felt as disgusted as if I had swallowed a fly. No wonder people always say that late developing deep affection is worse than something cheap. People were not deceiving me. After unbinding from the system, I took the money and went with my mother to travel to all sorts of places. From then on, with mountains high and seas wide, they had no more connection with me.